My advice would always be data has the most gravity. The future is very domain-specific model. You may have a frontier model or a foundational model, but you may want to distill it down so that you can get it more domain-specific, more pre-trained on proprietary data, because that's going to be where the most value is going to come for businesses across multiple industries.
Hi. Are you interested in AI and would like to know how to apply it in business? I'm Gosia, and as the host of the AI at Scale podcast by Schneider Electric, I invite AI practitioners and experts to share their experiences, challenges, and AI success stories. Our podcast features real AI solutions and innovations. Welcome back to AI at Scale podcast. This is Gosia Kurska, and today I have a pleasure hosting Taimur Rashid. What Taimur brings to this discussion are 6 years in Oracle, 9 years at Amazon Web Services, 3 years at Microsoft, and 2 years at Regis as EVP AI. Currently with AWS as Managing Director of GenAI Innovation and Delivery. So it is altogether 2 decades of experience encompassing leadership roles in product, market, business development, and cloud solutions architecture and engineering. His expertise spans big tech firms, but also growth stage startups, particularly in areas bridging technology, product, business, and go-to-market. He currently leads AWS professional services portfolio of GenAI solutions, building end-to-end AI solutions for customers. He also founded Recursion Venture Capital, a boutique venture capital and management consulting firm. Taimur is a University of Texas alumni with a focus on automata theory and knowledge-based systems. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gosia. Pleasure being here.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And, it's an exceptional episode because we are hosting Taimur directly in our office today, as he's visiting Warsaw. So we are actually sitting in the same room, and it's really great to have you here and welcome you in Warsaw. My first question will be about your experience and journey with Amazon Web Services. So what's your role right now in the company?
So my role right now is leading the Generative AI innovation and delivery team. We had started the Innovation Center about a year ago for Generative AI. And so we're about a several hundred person team, globally distributed, and we help customers adopt the GenAI platform of AWS.
Okay, that's really interesting. And how do you evaluate the importance of technology, data, and governance to build AI apps? And how exactly you are supporting your customers?
That's a great question. When you look at generative AI, even though in many ways when people look at generative AI today, it's the tip of the spear. They see these virtual assistants, they see chatbots, but behind all of those simple applications is a very complex set of technologies, all the way from the underlying data to the technology that powers that data, the application workflows, and then more importantly, the security and governance that goes around the data itself too. And so when we work with customers, we always like to start with what's their use cases, what are their business imperatives. And many times they're trying to drive productivity gains. They're trying to create revenue generating opportunities for their companies. And so once we have a good understanding of what their business drivers are, we can work backwards from there and really understand what's the nature of their applications, their data. We look at data readiness, for example. We like to see, hey, is the quality of the data up to par with the kinds of AI that they want to do? And then we look at security. Security is very important. And once we take a look at their underlying infrastructure, their data, their application framework, we can then start evaluating what's the best way to start with an application. And in most cases, what we typically do is we try and understand what sort of security requirements do they have. And based on that, we can build an application for them, typically a proof of concept, show them the art of the possible. And once they get that art of the possible, then we can expand it from there.
I see. And looking at the customers and the use cases you've been working recently, what's the level of understanding of the potential and limitations of GenAI? I wonder if you have more customers that are just showing up and asking you, we would like to start with GenAI, look for a use case for us, or do you have more that really come with a particular challenge or opportunity where they see that GenAI would make sense and you start the conversation at this point?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say that when I meet customers, the two most frequently asked questions are, what do we do and how do we get started, right? And that is why we invested in the Innovation Center, because we bring human expertise into the conversation. And when we meet with stakeholders at the customer side, what we're able to do is we're able to identify a set of use cases that they can begin to use GenAI for, right? And in most cases, people see things like ChatGPT or they'll see some other virtual assistant, and they want to mirror that as a starting point. And what I've seen more often is that is the starting use case. A virtual chatbot. It might be like a knowledge-based chatbot as well too. And that's a great way to sort of get started, get the system integrated with proprietary data. Now a customer can actually have a conversational chat based on their company data, which then opens up a variety of possibilities for them.
Yeah, that's a great approach, indeed. And you mentioned the security approach, the security side of these discussions. So what's the security first mindset, and how do you support the security and reliability of AI models for your customers?
That's a great question. Security has been a first principle for all of our GenAI engagements. In fact, when you look at the history of AWS, we've really emphasized two aspects which are so paramount. Number one is operational excellence, and number two is security. It could be any application you may have, a front office, a back office application. These are the first two most important principles that we have. When we look at security, we like to look at it end to end. And what we typically say is that security begins in the design phase of any application that you're building.
Yeah, correct.
From design through development, through the actual integration that ends up happening. More often than not, what we see is that the tough part is integrating with other systems and making sure that the security policies are truly adhered on all applications, all levels of the application, in fact. And now when you're dealing with multiple systems, when you look at a generative AI application, it's generating a response based on a variety of different systems. And those systems of record may have very, very sensitive data. They can be combined with unstructured data, which is maybe a little less sensitive. But now the application has to be very aware of authorization and authentication. And so when we work with customers, we typically have security end to end. And, from the design phase all the way through the production phase, and even after production, there's a variety of different things that we'll naturally talk about that delve into responsible AI, which is a very broad category of things, which security and data privacy are just one part of it.
Yes, and let's focus for a second on the design phase. I was curious, when looking at some of the architecture of our solutions, how much actually you need to spend of the time and efforts to design well the application so that you actually remove the risk, you mitigate the risk of some potential, let's say, harm or potential misalliance of how the application works versus the objective. And part of it was to be able to imagine to what kind of questions, for example, the bot should not answer. Like a typical question about, how to build something that is very harmful to the society, or, I don't know, an explosive or whatever. And you basically need to think about upfront, list this kind of questions, list the kind of areas that you don't want the bot to give the answer, or you want a bot to give the answer like, I cannot reply. So how do you actually design this kind of application? Do you have a checklist for these topics? How does it work in practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In practice, and I would say that getting it right in the design phase is the most important part, because everything downstream from that will then eventually fall into place, right? And so when you actually do look at the data itself, there's several dimensions that go into the design phase. One thing that you have to think about is, first off, the factual and the accuracy of the data itself, right? And that's where data quality, number one, comes into play. Now, as you look at the data quality around that, typically these models are trained with human beings giving the inputs and actually assigning certain weights to the models, right? This is where there's a lot of human judgment that gets involved, right? And so the first part of the design phase is to approach it in a fair way, right? Fairness is actually a very important part of that. And the only way you can really get to a point where you have assurance around the fairness of a model is by working with multiple stakeholders, right? The design phase actually is a process of a lot of collaboration with stakeholders, truly understanding the nature of the data, and then really saying, how can you have the right controls in place whereby there's no bias in how a model will predict something or generate a response, right? And so, yes, we go through a checklist. Oftentimes when we work with customers, they don't have a checklist. And so we can help and guide them to how to think about fairness, how to think about ethical AI, how to think about enabling the right mechanisms around transparency, and then more importantly, explainability. So when a model or a GenAI application gives a response, how can you actually go and check and see how it got there? And that's a process where you can actually show the reasoning process of a model. You can basically have the right traceability back to how did a model come to a certain output. And that process really is, like I said, working with stakeholders, understanding the requirements around it, making sure that the way the model has been trained, that you can't 100% remove bias, but you can mitigate the percentage of bias that goes into a model, right? And then from whatever you're unable to remove, you have the right checks and balances downstream in the application to correct for that.
Okay, and then you get the answer that a particular question is actually not the area of expertise of the bot, so it cannot reply. Yeah, so it's a good solution. And the second phase that seems quite interesting to me is the operation of the model. So how do you monitor if there are no drifts in the model, if the model is actually not deteriorating the quality of the answers over time when it's already in the production?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I always say that getting a Gen AI or any AI application to production is actually the first part of the journey, right? Because after that, you can have a variety of things that happen, right? The model can drift over time. The data can be sort of outdated in a way where now you have data drift as well too. What's very important is in those production environments to have the right observability capabilities for that, right? So you can actually look at responses, items that are generated, responses from the users, to be able to see, is there the right level of accuracy? And actually, it's really a closed feedback loop, right? Because as you can detect and see that a model has drifted, right, or the data has drifted, you can initiate retraining cycles. You can initiate an opportunity to update the data as well too. And so having those mechanisms in place is actually very important and part of the closed feedback loop.
That you are also supporting your clients with.
We support our clients with that as well too. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's really increasing the quality of how the model works, and you can improve this over time, right? With the feedback loop.
Yes.
Great. So I think it's time to take a closer look at the innovation center that you mentioned, because I'm very curious. Looking, in the past months or even the past year, there was supposed to be the year of AI practice. This is how it has been announced. How do you engage with customers in terms of education, workshops, engagement, production plan, and how is the Innovation Center supporting them? And what I'm really curious to know, what are the use cases, some practical examples, some innovative, use cases that you've been working on recently?
Yeah, so we started the Innovation Center in 2023.
Mhm.
So in fact, it's been a little over a year now that we established the Innovation Center. And what's very interesting about it, that its roots actually go back to 2017,
Mhm.
when we started what we call the ML Solutions Lab. This was right around the time when machine learning was really starting to become more mainstream with ML ops. And our philosophy around emerging technologies is it can't be easily adopted. Emerging technologies require human judgment, human capital. And when the GenAI wave was beginning, we invested in the Innovation Center, started off with just about 100 or so data scientists and strategists. And now you fast forward about more than a year, we're several hundred people globally distributed, supporting all of our major regions. And our engagement model is the following. We really pair up strategists and scientists with customers
Mhm.
that want to experiment with GenAI, or they have a very clear thing of what they want to do, but they need guidance around it, right?
Okay.
And we've seen that that's where we bring most of the expertise. We're able to really understand their business imperatives, and from that create and identify use cases, help them prioritize it. We use an approach where we say, what's the feasibility of a certain use case based on the readiness of the data, the sensitivity of the data, and we have a rubric that we apply to identify what are those first use cases that we should actually pursue with a customer. There's so much demand right now that we get nominations from the field,
Mhm.
from account teams. We go through a process of qualifying that so that we could get the best experts on those opportunities. And the way we engage with them is we do proof of concepts. That's how we start off. Our proof of concepts range from 4 to 6 weeks, just depending on the complexity of the use case.
Mhm.
And then once we're able to demonstrate the art of the possible, get the customer excited, actually show a GenAI application on their data, we see that immediately there are more use cases that a customer wants to do, right?
Mhm. Okay.
And what's very interesting is 2023 was the year where there were a lot of experimentation going on, and there were bespoke proof of concepts that were happening. What we've seen in 2024 is we've gone from bespoke POCs to more integrated POCs.
Okay.
Now, customers have a set of use cases that they want to pursue with us. And in the process of doing multiple use cases, we can actually go back to the foundational layers like the data layer, the DevOps, and the application development aspects of the entire stack, and then essentially build a scaffolding layer for them to do not just one POC,
Mhm.
but any number of POCs based off of that foundational layer. We've supported customers doing very simple use cases such as, a knowledge chatbot, for
Mhm.
example, a virtual assistant for call centers. We've
Mhm.
seen that as well. We've seen actually some customers want to use natural language interfaces to manage their cloud infrastructure. And I have some examples that I'd be more than happy to share there. The use cases continue to expand from true 100% generative AI use cases, and then a combination of your classic machine learning models, such as product recommendations, fraud detection, and the likes of that.
Mhm.
But we continue to see that customers, even in the retail space, are wanting to use the technology for similarity searches.
Mhm.
And similarity searches can help with visual search, product recommendations, or even to the extent that cybersecurity companies want to do anomaly detection
Mhm.
at the perimeter of their security layer. So,
Mhm. And how much in this work with customers is requiring some additional education? Like, I'm curious to know how many of the customers are coming with some ideas and you have to stop them because there is some homework that has to be done, like in terms of data management, preparing the infrastructure. How does it look like?
yeah, there is a process around education.
Yeah.
So I would say that as much as customers come to our doors and saying they want to experiment with GenAI, we also have to educate them. In fact, we constantly have to even educate ourselves because there's so much advancement going on in the AI space. A new model comes up every other week, right?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
so uh, what we try and do is we step back and say, what are the conceptual things that we have to educate customers on, right? And so we go down to the basics, right? we don't even get to the point of talking about AWS services. We talk about what are large language models, how are they built using the transformer technology. We talk about retrieval systems, and so when to use something like, RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. And so we make sure that we can land some of those concepts just so that customers are educated with all the things that go into building a GenAI application. Typically what we've seen is customers want to know about which model to use, right? So there's proprietary models. We offer, for example, the Anthropic models through Bedrock. We also offer a variety of other ones like Meta's Llama, as well as Mistral. And so there's quite a bit of education we have to do conceptually, and then architecturally, and then with our services, such as Amazon Bedrock, Amazon SageMaker, and the likes.
Okay. So let's get to the details. If you can give me one example that was particularly interesting for you.
Yeah, so why don't we give an example of actually Schneider Electric?
Okay.
Right? So the Innovation Center actually engaged with Schneider Electric. There was an opportunity where they wanted to create a knowledge chatbot for their service personnel. And you can imagine that it's a very involved set of things to do, right? And what this knowledge chatbot actually enabled was service agents had access to information in a very rapid and accurate way. And what's very interesting about the use case is we actually had to implement RAG, which is the retrieval augmented generation, so that the most up-to-date and factual information could be available in the model generation, right? And so when you actually look at a model has been trained point in time. But now if you want to bring more relevant data or contextual data, this is where you have to implement a RAG system. So the Innovation Center partnered with Schneider Electric to kind of build that capability. What was actually very important was responsible AI. And so actually being able to explain how a generated response came to be and showing the reasoning process of the model itself. And so we partnered very closely on both the retrieval system, the responsible AI component of it, and actually just building the chatbot. And we, from the feedback that we got from the team, there was a 40% productivity gain with service agents being able to access information in time and therefore resolving requests in a much shorter time frame. So that was just a great example, and we had a great partnership with the Schneider team.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear it. And indeed, explainability and the responsible usage of AI is something that is really top of the agenda. And what I'm quite surprised with this still is to see how much effort we put in place to really make sure that the tool is adding this value that you mentioned to the employees, but also to give them additional ways to, for example, get information to be educated. Because in most of the cases of this kind of bots that we are creating, we give also access to the documentation. So you not only get the suggestion, the reply from the model, but also you get a link to the source of where this is coming from. So the person can actually, if they wish, they can go to the documentation itself and get confirmation that this is really the source, and this is where you can find more information if you want to educate yourself.
Yep, and enabling that is so important because it empowers the knowledge worker with just so much more information.
Yeah. And we have time for one more question, so maybe we can get a bit more personal. And you could maybe share with us what was your journey in terms of getting into AI, as you said, following all the trends and new acquisitions, mergers, and everything that's happening with the new models, how the different AI companies are developing the space. Any particular advice for people who would like to learn more about AI?
That's a great question. And the way I got into generative AI, I've always been close to data and emerging technologies. But when I had joined Redis, one of my charters was to enable an AI business for the company. And I would say that the advice that I give is no matter how much things evolve within the model space, frameworks, everything goes back to data. And I almost say that there's no AI strategy without data strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And that foundational aspect of data becomes even more important with the evolving nature of the different models that are being available. And so my journey with generative AI started with data, right? And so Redis was a real-time database in memory, and there was just so much value to be captured from that, that when we added vector similarity capabilities into the actual data source, we were able to open up a whole new door for generative AI adoption, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my advice would always be data has the most gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything goes back to it, because even when you look at foundational models today, the future is very domain specific models, right? And so you may have a frontier model or a foundational model, but you may want to distill it down so that you can get it more domain specific, more pre-trained on proprietary data, because that's going to be where the most value is going to come for businesses across multiple industries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's the evaluation of potential and of the limitations is probably something that is crucial for the customers.
It is, and I think it's important to be able to understand what those limitations are, because technology will always have certain constraints that you have to work around with, and that's where you have so many evolutionary architectures that come into play.
I see. Thank you very much for all the insights and for sharing your story with us and our audience. It was a pleasure to hosting you, Taimur.
No, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being part of this podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on AI at Scale podcast. Be sure to visit our se.com/AI website and learn more about our AI at Scale solutions. Head over to our Schneider blog platform to read more. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your preferred platform and share it with your network. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for the next episode.